Hello and welcome to 6 Paths, and today I will tell you about What If Naruto Went Berserk, Part 2. If you enjoy the video, give it a big thumbs up, and if you don't want to miss future parts, then subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notification. Now let's begin. He felt strange, on the verge of consciousness and unconsciousness. His numb body slowly came back with sensations on the surface. He coughed a few times, his lungs felt like they were on fire, and with each cough it was as if they were brutally torn open. After the water was expelled from his lungs, he felt a huge burning sensation on the side of his body. Opening his heavy eyes, Naruto gritted his teeth as he forced himself to stand up, getting to his knees on the wet dirt. The first thing he saw was the entrance to an unfamiliar forest. Everything around him was strange. He was in the middle of nowhere, alone. A sharp pain made him groan slightly, and he looked at the arrow stuck in his body. As much as he wanted to pull, he couldn't, not yet. Forcing himself to stand, he checked his body. His sword was still in the sheath on his back, which relieved him a little. His body showed some cuts and bruises in addition to the arrow wounds that he had no idea how he got. His pockets still had some jewelry in them, necklaces for the most part. But he knew he lost some of the jewelry he had picked up. Not that it made much difference, the rings were still on his fingers, and one of those rings alone was enough for a good deal of money. He looked around, with no sign of Hans or Konohamaru. If they had stopped in the same place as him, they probably wouldn't have left him there. Well, that's what he wanted to think, but being honest with himself, he doubted it. He had been through enough to know that human beings are rotten, and children, especially, are cruel. A cold wind made his body shiver, and not wanting to freeze to death, Naruto began to walk barefoot through the soft dirt into the forest. The first thing he would do would be to dry his clothes on a fire and warm his body. As he goes deeper into the forest, he gets a certain amount of dry twigs, but still continues walking. He wanted to at least check his surroundings first. Maybe he could be near a road or something. Unfortunately, the crossbow he had taken from one of the guards was no longer with him, only his sword. Well, if he was lucky enough to find any animals, that would be more than enough for a productive hunt. After some time, he found himself kneeling in front of a small fire, his chest bare, waiting for his shirt to dry. His eyes stared intensely into the flames, letting himself be consumed by the mesmerizing dance that seemed to touch his soul with its heat. His mind wandered through all the events that left a mark on him. Scars, traumas, sensations that would certainly take a long time to fade away. That is if they were really going to disappear. Attack on his camp, fight with bandits more than once, almost abused also more than once, hunger, pain. But his heart was still beating. Stopping to think, he couldn't imagine a child his age going through what he went through. To have the same strength, or the same endurance, or at least to survive. He was always called a freak. Maybe he really was. He just didn't understand how he got there. At certain moments his body acted on its own. It was as if he was a spectator watching from afar what his own body did. His mind said no to life, but his body said the opposite. And even after all that, all those scars, he still had no idea what to do. He didn't have something he really wanted or longed for. No one he could spend his days beside. HMPH. He should start his journey to find something like that soon, then. A sigh escaped his lips, and Naruto focused his eyes on a movement not too far away. A bear and its cubs, walking calmly in the opposite direction from where he was standing. The cubs, curious, were running and playing among themselves, with their mother following close behind. Until her eyes focused on Naruto, and she immediately went on guard. Blue against animalistic brown. As if one was analyzing the other, checking if it was a threat or not. But after a while, the bear broke eye contact, turning around and walking after its cubs. The animal wouldn't do anything if Naruto didn't, and the boy knew it. He had spent enough time in the forest to understand things he did not understand before. Animals were much more honest and honorable than humans. Which was intriguing. Looking away, Naruto picks up his shirt, now dry, and tears it off. Setting the fabric aside, he takes a few deep breaths as he places his hand over the arrow. His muscles tensed and a muffled groan escaped through his clenched teeth from the pain of pulling out the arrow. Blood began to trickle down the side of his torso, and Naruto hurried to tie the fabric of his shirt around his wound. His eyes fell on the bloody arrow. One more mark of his survival, one more scar. Not that he really cared, until now, his appearance had only brought him trouble. Sighing once more, he sat down and stood still for a while, just watching the flames of the fire. He had no destination now. He couldn't go back to that town, and he hadn't gathered enough information to know where to go. His eyes then focused on his sword. Mercenary work was dangerous. But at least it would give him something. Unfortunately, not many people hired children as mercenaries, that being the reason he didn't really try that hard. At least I have money. He whispered into the wind, lying down and raising both his hands, looking at the rings on his fingers. What he would do with money? He didn't know either. After a while, he stood up, put out the fire, took his sword, and continued his walk. He had to get out of that forest, find a road or something. But first, food had priority. The hours passed, night fell, and he remained content with the boar he managed to hunt, although it was totally coincidental. Lying down, he let himself be carried away by the starry sky. He did not like to face his surroundings at night, he felt as if the darkness was going to swallow him up. At night, alone, in a forest, it was stuffy and suffocating, although he is used to that feeling. At least, looking up at the sky he felt freer, less suffocated. He almost felt as if he had a purpose. It was much better than keeping his gaze on the ground and having to deal with all those worries and limitations. The stars made him feel good, and he didn't know why. But it was a good way to get some sleep, even if only for a few hours, before the nightmares once again haunted him. He woke up sweaty, his hands were shaking, and his breathing was heavy. His hand immediately fell on his sword, still with the feeling of the Lord's tongue on his neck. His heart was beating so loudly that the silence of the forest allowed him to hear it. Soon, his mind stabilized, and he calmed down. Looking up at the sky, he could see faint rays of sunlight shining on the horizon. HMPH, he had slept longer than he was used to, it seemed. Getting up, he looks at the wound on the side of his abdomen, and is not surprised to see that it has almost healed. Advantage of having a strong body. Picking up his sword, he begins to walk into the forest again, in his continuous attempt to find something that would refer to civilization. Days, weeks, whatever. Time was no longer something that mattered to him, all that mattered was the day-to-day events. After he found a narrow dirt road, he walked for a long time accompanied by none other than the demons of the night that haunted his dreams. His wound had long since healed, and his shirt was unfortunately lost in the forest. His naked torso showed the scars spread across his chest, abdomen and back, something that made the few people he saw in that time not stop to help him. In the distance, he heard muffled sounds of screaming, and as he got closer, the sounds became more audible, now accompanied by the sound of iron against iron. A battle. This made the boy roll his eyes. He didn't want to go all the way back the way he came in, and there was no way to avoid that path, since he was walking side by side with a river. Maybe he could get around it through the plain. As he got close enough, He arched an eyebrow when he saw several wagons scattered along the length of the road, literally just a few steps from where he was standing. Dozens of men were fighting each other. On one side, men in similar clothes, almost a uniform. Cleaner and tidier appearance. On the other, men with dirty and different clothes, a more worn appearance, although they were quite large. On one side a group, mercenaries perhaps. On the other, thieves, that was clear. The number of men fighting was large, as if a small war was going on in front of him. He cared little about the conflict itself. What irritated him was the fact that there was no way around it. For a few moments, he even thought about swimming. "Hey, kid. What the hell are you doing there? Hide." He heard one of the men shout, but he remained indifferent. His neutral expression just watched the whole thing, waiting for the battle to be over. Clearly the mercenary group would win, so he had nothing to fear from them kidnapping or killing him at the end of the battle. However, the man's shout in his direction drew unwanted attention. The thieves probably thought he was along with the group of mercenaries, and Naruto rolled his eyes as he saw two men approaching him. "Hey, hey!" One of the mercenaries shouted at the bandits, but it was only a futile action. As soon as the two men approached, Naruto opened his eyes wide and picked up his sword. Leaning his torso to the side while crouching with his left leg, he slashed the man's abdomen, causing his guts to fall out of his body. Turning his body, Naruto dodges a piercing attack coming from the second bandit, and raising his sword after jumping, he splits the man's head in half. The mercenary stared at Naruto with wide eyes for some time, in utter surprise and disbelief. The boy, in turn, just put one foot on the bandit's chest and drew his sword while pushing his body forward. The battle was over, the rest of the bandits fled, and the mercenaries helped the wounded and reunited with their allies. Naruto, for his part, wiped the blood from his sword and put it back in its sheath, walking among the fallen bodies on the ground as if they were nothing but rocks in his path. Despite his indifferent expression, his guard automatically rose when the mercenary approached. You're quite good, kid," he said, staring at Naruto, who just ignored him. "Are you alone? Where are your parents?" he insisted, walking right up to the boy, who again ignored him. "Hey, kid, look." He touched his shoulder softly, which was enough for Naruto to turn away violently and grab his sword. "Don't touch me," he almost shouted, staring at the man with burning eyes. Mercenaries came towards him, but the man stopped them. "It's all right. We've seen enough reactions like this to know what happened," he said, looking at the others for a few moments, before turning his gaze back to Naruto. The man had a slightly older face, scars across his arms and face, a tall, strong body despite his age. A man with experience, Naruto realized. "Look, kid. We're not going to hurt you, okay? My name is Mifune, and I assure you we don't want to hurt you." He slowly raised his hands, and little by little, Naruto lowered his sword, calming himself, although he was still on alert. Mifune's analytical and experienced eyes ran over the boy's body. Curious, surprised, intrigued by his scars, perhaps. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Naruto put away his sword, not answering him, though it was obvious the answer was. The next town is 5 days' ride on horseback from here. Why don't you come with us?" The question attracted the attention of both Naruto and the other mercenaries. "Mifune. It's okay. Trust me. I've seen enough similar situations." Naruto stared at him, his intense eyes, used to swallowing what they saw, this time, were swallowed by the blackness of the older man's gaze. His mind thought about his options, and in the end came to a conclusion. Why not? He didn't know where to start looking for that which would complete him. He might as well continue on the path his father had set for him. Soon, his eyes became calmer, and Naruto straightened his posture, becoming more relaxed, nodding to Mifune. His instincts didn't alert him to the danger, which was already a good sign. Come on, there's room for you at the back. He nodded, starting to walk toward one of the wagons. Naruto stared at his back for a moment, before following him. Mifune. Is it over? He heard a female voice, but sketched the slightest expression of curiosity. Yes, it's over. We will have one more member with us, he said, making room for Naruto, who looked at the woman for a few moments. She had grayish hair, although she was not old. Skin a little dark, eyes brown. Whoa, his hair is golden. Who is this? She asked, apparently a little surprised and excited by his hair. Naruto had disgusted memories with that sentence. Well, him. I just saw the boy slice through two men like they were nothing. He has nowhere to go, no family. He will stay with us until the next town, and who knows, maybe after that. Mifune turned to him. You may go up, boy, he said, and Naruto climbed into the wagon. His eyes ran over the interior. A few women sat hugging their legs, staring at him curiously, even fearfully. One in particular stared at him, even a little irritated. Great, one more mouth to feed, she said with a bitter tone, but Naruto was more than happy to ignore her, sitting down in a corner well away from her and hugging his sword. Temari. Didn't you hear what Mifune said? The boy has ability. If Mifune saw potential in him, it's because he's worth it, the gray-haired woman said. Mifune is getting old. Do you even have money? She asked, looking at Naruto. The boy stared at her for a while, then threw one of his rings at her, and she caught it still in the air. Is that enough? He said in a hoarse voice, ignoring the incredulous looks and surprised sighs. This is a gold ring. Look at the size of this diamond. Whoa, where did you get it? The gray-haired woman asked. I stole it from a nobleman, he answered simply, and she arched her eyebrow. You're not being chased, are you? Well, we have our own problems. He is dead. He interrupted her, and she stared at him for a while, attentive. It didn't seem to affect her. Why would it? Anyway. My name is Ryuzetsu. Despite the lack of a smile or any expression to show anything, Naruto noticed her friendly tone. Honestly, he didn't want to talk, especially since there was a chance he wouldn't be with them for long. But they were not hostile. It was already something. Naruto, he said low, hugging his sword tighter and staring at the ground, noticing the woman's satisfied expression. Naruto sighs slightly as he feels his back slam against the wooden wall of the wagon, interrupting his little moment of sleep, in which he hadn't even realized he had dozed off. In front of him, Ryuzetsu was staring at him with her head resting on her knees. Her intense gaze made the boy feel uncomfortable, but not something that would completely take his attention, since it was not a malicious look, but one of pure curiosity and interest. Although it didn't make him relax much. Ryuzetsu, you are going to put a hole in the boy if you keep staring at him like that, one of the women said, causing small muffled giggles, especially from Ryuzetsu, who straightened her posture and put a strand of hair behind her ear. Sorry. But it's just that I've never seen a person like him. I thought Temari was unique for her blonde hair, and she still is, but come on, his hair is almost the same color as the ring he gave her. And his eyes are as blue as the sky. she said in a tone drowned in a mixture of admiration and excitement. Naruto, despite the praise, just kept staring at the ground. I have to agree. I have never seen anyone with golden hair. Another woman said, and Naruto closed his eyes for a moment, sighing. What was so special about his hair? It was just a bunch of messy strands. That scar on your face. Who or what caused it? Ryuzetsu asked. Naruto didn't answer, or even stare at her, but his hand went almost immediately to the claws on his necklace, squeezing them lightly. An action that did not go unnoticed by the curious woman's eyes. What was it? Those are long claws. He stared at her, trying to understand the reason for all this curiosity. Or all that friendly behavior. Arg, will you stop? Temari's irritated voice caught the attention of Ryuzetsu, who looked at the girl. If he doesn't want to say it, fuck it. Temari. I'm just trying to make him more comfortable in the midst of so many strangers. Well, you're doing a shitty job. The woman sighed, falling silent and hugging her own legs again, resting her chin on her knees. A mountain lion. Her husky voice caught Ryuzetsu's attention, and she arched an eyebrow. It was a mountain lion. He clenched his sword slightly, closing his eyes, but feeling the woman's satisfied gaze still on him. The hours passed quickly, especially since Naruto slept again. He didn't know if it was because his body was really tired, or for some other reason. It wouldn't be long before night came, and the horses stopped. They began to get off the wagons and walk across the plain in order to set up their camp. The men carried the materials to put up their tents and the women carried what was needed for the night. Naruto climbed down from the wagon after putting his sword on his back. His eyes immediately ran to the people in front of him. A large number of men and women. Further ahead, Mifune walked calmly towards him, as did other men. How are you, boy? He asked, staring at Naruto, who in turn stared back at him for a while, until he nodded briefly. When you said he was young, I didn't think he was a teenager. How old is this kid? A man just behind Mifune asked, eyebrow arched, one hand on his sword and the other on the back of his neck, scratching at his short dark hair. Naruto stared at him for a while, focusing his eyes on the scar on the side of the man's face. Old enough. He replied simply, and the man snorted, giving a small, awkward smile. Hey. Reminds me of someone. He said amused, looking at Mifune, who just ignored him. Everything went well? The older man asked, looking at Ryuzetsu, who was approaching with the other women by his side. Yes, he's sweet. You have to see the ring he gave Temari. The woman said somewhat excitedly, making the men curious to say the least. Some even intrigued. Ring? What ring? One of them asked, this being the most incredulous, apparently. He had short hair, as did most of the men there. Hard features and a bit rugged. Wrinkled, though not too old. A gold ring with a diamond on top. It's enough for our expenses for a while. Temari replied, showing the ring that seemed to sparkle in front of her eyes. She had to admit it was quite beautiful. The man took a few steps towards her, staring at the ring with wide eyes, surprised and annoyed. Ooh, the ring he gave her is bigger than the one you gave her, Daimaru. One of the men teased, slapping Daimaru lightly on the back and laughing at his incredulous expression. Daimaru's brown eyes soon faced Naruto. He straightened his posture and walked toward him with slow, precise steps. Naruto, however, just stared at him, feeling unaffected by the man's futile attempt to appear threatening. But, just in case, he put his hand on the handle of his sword. Daimaru. Mifune warned him. Daimaru looked at him for a few moments, before turning his gaze to Naruto again. Look, newbie, I'm going to let this one slide because you're new here, and you're also very young, so I don't have to worry too much. You can flirt with any woman you want, but Temari is off limits. He said, slowly and intimidatingly. His voice was coarse, which added to his striking presence. However, Naruto just spat in front of his feet and turned away from him, without averting his gaze, as if to challenge him as he walked away. Oh. Who do you think you are to do that, Daimaru? I told you, damn it, I'm not your fucking property. I'll flirt with whoever I want. Temari said angrily, walking away from him in stride. Daimaru followed her with his gaze, until he sighed and scratched the back of his neck. Try not to start a fight, please? We've had enough trouble. Mifune said, turning and walking toward a group of people sitting in front of him, waiting for their dinner. Daimaru snorted and followed him, casting a few glances in Naruto's direction as he walked. Mifune. We won't have much food tonight either. A woman, this being the oldest Naruto had seen so far, approached the man with a somewhat worried expression. Mifune put his hands on his waist and sighed. Naruto arched an eyebrow as he looked at him, but then looked away, running his eyes around the camp and stopping briefly at a few people who looked at him curiously. He didn't know if it was because of his hair, or because he was someone they had never seen before. Or because his chest was still bare. Why don't we take the rookie hunting? Daimaru's voice caught his attention, and Naruto turned to them. Daimaru had a bow and quiver in his hands, and one on his back. He walked toward Naruto with an expression of indifference. Come on, rookie, prove yourself. I'm not going hunting so you can scratch your ass here in camp. Or do you think you can buy me off with one of your cute little rings? He asked, a clear tone of disregard in his voice. Naruto sighed, taking the bow from the man's hands, ignoring the looks in his direction. Are you sure, kid? Do you know how to use a bow? Mifune asked, still with his hands on his waist. Yes. Naruto said, placing the quiver on his back. Great, what are we waiting for? The night won't be long now, we have to be quick. Daimaru said, turning and walking towards the forest. Who is the boy? The woman asked Mifune, though she looked at Naruto who was only a few steps away. I met him at the battle earlier. He defeated 2 men by himself. The boy is young, but he is skilled. Mifune said, following with his eyes as Naruto followed Daimaru and some other men. But before he got too far away, he stopped and turned to Mifune. My name is Naruto. He stared at the elder for a few moments, before continuing on his way. Mifune remained silent, crossing his arms as he watched them go, until the woman leaned slightly toward him. What's this ring all about? I heard Temari and the others mention it. He sighed amused and turned around, walking with her toward the group ahead. Hey, you won't believe the new guy. One of the men from the hunting party said, an excited smile on his lips and a relaxed expression. His voice caught the attention of the people who were around a large fire, spread out in the center. Some were sitting on the ground, others on pieces of wood, others standing with their backs propped up on the pillars that supported the tents. Behind the man, Daimaru walked with an unfriendly expression as he held a folded skin under his arm, and Naruto came with a large deer on his shoulders, an arrow stuck in the middle of his head. The deer was skinned, and blood was dripping from Naruto's hands, evidencing that he was the one who skinned the animal. Oh, boy. This is a big deer. The boy is strong to be able to carry that thing. A man said as he approached, a look of surprise on his face. That was a great shot. Right in the middle of the face. Looks like the boy has spent some time in the forest. Another man, this one shorter than the first, said, placing the bow propped up on the side of a tent near the center of the camp, a smile on his face as he sat down. Naruto stared at him for a while, before walking over to the place that was used as a kitchen, and throwing the deer onto a makeshift table. The women, and some men who were also in the kitchen, looked at the animal with slightly wide eyes in surprise. Well, along with what we have, the whole camp will eat tonight. Good job, kid. The woman from before said, and Naruto gave a slight nod in her direction before walking away. There is a lake not far from here. Go wash up. Take these clothes, they should fit you. Mifune said, handing some clothes to Naruto, crossing his arms afterwards. The boy nodded and turned around, walking in the direction he was pointed in. After a few minutes of walking along the path lit only by the light of the full moon, he reached the lake. The reflection of the moon made him admire the beautiful scenery for a while. Naruto looked around, and when he was sure he was alone, he put his sword down and removed his clothes, entering the lake. The cold water made his skin shiver, but a comforting feeling spread through his body as he dove in, swimming calmly to the middle of the lake and back to the surface. He threw back his head and ran his hands through his hair. His eyes focused on the water around him, and his hand reached out in front of him in a somewhat hopeful attempt to touch the moon that reflected in the lake. The sky had always mesmerized him, the moon had always captivated him, especially at times like this, when it appeared in all its splendor in the sky. A sigh escaped his lips as his hand sank into the water. Moments like that made him do stupid things. It was stupid of him to think he could touch the moon. Shaking his head, he finished washing up and swam back to the shore, barely drying himself and putting on the clothes Mifune had given him. They were a little tight, especially the shirt, but he just shrugged. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't dried properly and water had made the fabric stick to his body. A dark blue blouse, black mercenary pants, leather shoes that went halfway to his ankle. Putting his sword back on his back, he walks back to the camp, this being the only place illuminated by something other than moonlight. As soon as he arrived, the man from the hunting party, Beorward if he was not mistaken, raised a cup and smiled in his direction. "Oh, Naruto, come, sit with us," he shouted, too loud for Naruto's liking, who scratched the back of his neck. Nervousness and shame were not things that were part of his everyday life, but having so many looks like those fixed on him caused these feelings to rise in his chest. After the death of his father, and even before that, he was used to angry or disinterested glances in his direction. He thought about refusing, but with so many people staring at him, he was forced to approach. He sat close enough to feel included, but far enough away not to be easily touched. "Why is your hair golden?" one of the men asked, and Naruto blinked a few times. What? I've never seen a hair color like yours. It looks like it's made of gold," another man said, taking a sip from the drink in his cup after he finished saying. I don't know. The man who took care of me. Well, he wasn't exactly my father. The words came out without him realizing it, and he grimaced slightly. He had no idea that he was so longing that he could carry on a conversation without even realizing it. Maybe it was the nostalgia of seeing a group of mercenaries gathered together for dinner. "Those scars are cool. Ryuzetsu mentioned a mountain lion, or something like that." He looked at the woman for a few moments, she just smiled and shrugged, and Naruto sighed lightly. "Yes. Hey, You're quite young, and that scar looks a while old. When was this? Beorward asked. I don't know. I was about 6, I think. No fucking way. 6. How old are you now? He ran his eyes around the people who had spoken, and he cleared his throat. It had been a while since he had last been in a similar situation. I'm 10. I think. Beorward almost spit out his drink. 10. Holy shit, I thought you were 16, 17. Boy, you're pretty big for someone so young. Naruto scowled, and just smiled as he scratched the back of his neck in nervousness. That wasn't so bad. The night passed quickly, and the tired mercenaries went towards their respective tents to sleep. Naruto took his plate, as well as some others, to the lake and washed them beside some older women and men, who, as soon as they saw him, almost forced him to leave the plates there, saying that this kind of work was their responsibility. He didn't really understand why he couldn't wash his own dishes. But he didn't complain. His eyes focused on the camp again. He didn't feel tired enough to go to sleep, he had slept enough on the way there. Not wanting to go back to the wagon, he put his hands in his pockets and walked around the camp, exploring the area he was in a little more. As he moved a few dozen, maybe hundreds of yards away from the camp, he began to hear groans. No, maybe screams or something. His hand immediately went to the hilt of his sword, and his body went into a state of alertness. His silent footsteps followed the weak breeze that swayed the grass and the leaves of the few surrounding trees. His vigilant blue eyes focused on the direction the noises echoed, getting louder and louder as he drew closer. But it was no enemy that made these noises. No situation in which he should draw his sword. Further ahead, hidden by a few trees that surrounded her, Temari was swinging a short sword, slicing the air with each movement. Naruto relaxed a bit and allowed himself to watch her for a while. Her footwork was not very good, being quite sloppy at times despite her clear agility. Her movements, while fast, were not consistent, and from the movement she was making, he figured she was just trying to cut through the enemy's armor, not do any damage. They were simple, short, sloppy movements, done in a rather ugly way. It was clear that she was an amateur. Sighing, Naruto approached, purposefully stepping on the branches and making his presence known. Temari turned suddenly upon hearing the sound of his footsteps, her eyes staring at Naruto for some time. Shame and anger coursed through her greenish eyes. What do you want? She asked in a snarl, clenching the short sword in her hand and narrowing her eyes in his direction. Naruto didn't answer immediately, he just took a few steps closer, letting himself be illuminated by the moonlight. What are you doing? What a stupid question, and he knew it. Temari clicked her tongue and grumbled lowly, straightening her posture. Training, why? I'm not allowed to? She put her hand on her waist and looked at him with disgust. I didn't say that. But I know you thought it. What? Does it hurt to see a woman training with a sword? Is it bad that I want to be a mercenary? Naruto arched an eyebrow. Where did she get that from? He didn't say anything, it was just a question. An idiotic one, he admitted, but one that didn't hide any twisted words. Do you want to be a mercenary? Do you have a problem with that? They remained silent, which only seemed to irritate the girl even more, much to Naruto's confusion. You men are not the only ones who can wield a sword. I have heard this all my life, how women are not suited for war, how sloppy women are with a blade. It doesn't matter. He interrupted her, and she arched her eyebrows in surprise and confusion. What? Naruto crossed his arms. In a battle, in a war, All that matters is the strength and skill of the one wielding the sword. It doesn't matter if you are a man or a woman, what matters is if you have what it takes to fight, to survive. She stared at him intensely for some time, incredulous, as if she herself did not believe his words. If you're saying this because you feel sorry for me, I swear. No. I don't pity you. Anyone can be a mercenary if he has the skill. A warrior uses all the weapons he has. He walked a few steps toward her, slow and short steps, hesitating to come any closer. You may not have the strength of a man, but you may have something to make up for it. Tamari closed her eyes and crossed her arms after putting the sword in its sheath. What do you mean by that? I saw your movements. If I may say so, they are terrible. She grimaced, and then picked up the sword again, gritting her teeth as she felt her face heat up. But I saw your speed. He said quickly, stopping her in her tracks. You have no skill, but you are fast, no strength, but you have an agile body. If you attack first, in the right way, you will kill your enemy before he can even attack you. She straightened her posture, digesting his words. My father said that I would never be able to go into battle. That I was too weak, and that my opponents would be twice my size, twice my strength. She said with a low tone, words slow and slightly slurred. Indeed, your opponents will be twice your size. But there is a way to ignore that. She arched an eyebrow. In a battle, there are almost no people who take advantage of low blows. Maybe because everyone is about the same height or something, I don't know. But someone of your stature, for example, can take advantage of the fact that your opponent won't be waiting for an attack on his legs, and even if he does wait, he will have a hard time blocking your attacks. Naruto ran his eyes around, and soon, walked to a place not far from there, picking up 2 pieces of wood of the same size, throwing one towards the girl. It may not be much, but I'm still bigger than you. She looked at him with clear doubt on her face. Do you want me to attack you? He stood in a defensive position. You need someone to train with. I assume that the men here don't take you very seriously. You need training, to learn how to throw low blows, and high blows. You never know. Tamari stared at him, the anger from before fading completely, and only doubt present in her expression. Why are you doing this? As far as I know, we are 2 strangers. Naruto was thoughtful for a while. And really, thinking about it, it wasn't like him to do something like that. In that moment alone, he had said more than he had the entire trip. Maybe that little display of kindness earlier had affected him more than he had thought. The image of the boys pushing him off that hill returned to his mind, followed by the image of Hans and Konohamaru, 2 boys with no training whatsoever, alone in the world if they had survived. I don't know. She grimaced. Really? Yes, I have no idea. Maybe I just want to train with someone and not just the air for a change. She, again, stared at him. No matter how hard she tried, Tamari couldn't tell what he was thinking. Sighing, the girl got into attack position. The piece of wood was similar in length to the short sword around her waist. Your left foot is too far forward. You are too bent over. He said, and she tried to correct herself. Naruto straightened his posture and approached her, using the piece of wood to instruct her. He was so immersed in his little lesson that he didn't notice a pair of eyes staring at them both. Daimaru had a bottle of drink in his hand, his eyes fixed on the image in front of him. Anger burning in his chest at seeing that boy so close to Tamari, even though he was very young. Tamari was not far behind. She had not passed the age of 15, but she was already a remarkable and beautiful woman in his eyes. A growl echoed through his throat, and as he finished his bottle, he turned and walked with sloppy steps towards the camp. He would finally have his alone time with Temari after so many failed attempts, only for that boy to get in the way of his plans. The next day dawned. The sun was beginning to light up the inside of some wagons and even some tents. Few people were awake, but those who were already up were doing their morning chores. Naruto was already used to waking up in the middle of the night. He had already done what he was supposed to do, and at the moment, he was swinging his sword against the air. 49. 50. Each movement as fast as the last, each swing of his sword blowing a strong, but small, gust of wind that swayed the short grass. Sweat dripped down his body and dripped onto the dirt. His bare chest showed his muscles that tensed with every movement. His sword was large and heavy, but he always made it heavier by tying stones around the blade as tightly as he could so that they would not come off in his movements. The sun hit his eyes, and for a few moments he stopped swinging his sword and looked at the horizon. He liked to watch the sunrise. It was beautiful, although it didn't captivate him like a beautiful night with a full moon. He finished his little training after a while, and went down to the camp after washing in the lake. Most people were already awake, including Ryuzetsu, who was talking to the same woman in the kitchen. A few mercenaries were training together, and Naruto arched an eyebrow when he saw Daimaru staring at him, right after he blinked at Temari, who had just come out of her tent. "Oh, newbie, how about a quick training session?" he asked, forcing a friendly smile. Something Naruto noticed. The boy arched an eyebrow and stared at him. "Daimaru, you and your horrible ideas. What are you planning this time?" one of the mercenaries asked, interrupting his little training and leaning on his sword. "Nothing." Mifune said he saw the boy kill 2 men like it was nothing. "I just want to train with him." If Mifune said so, then he is quite capable. Daimaru said, and Naruto sighed. "Come on. It's just a quick training, it's not like you have anything better to do." Daimaru insisted, and Naruto rolled his eyes as he approached. Why not? He didn't have any time to train with a real skilled person. That would be nice. Those guards in that city gave him a lot of trouble. Daimaru smiled slightly and moved a few steps away, getting into an attack position and facing Naruto, who did the same. The man purposely shouted that to get Temari's attention, since the girl had spent a good few hours training with Naruto last night. Daimaru attacked first, attempting a horizontal slash across Naruto's chest. But the boy dodged, throwing his torso backwards. The man, however, attacked again, this time faster, trying to cut the side of his body. Naruto defended with his sword, countering with a slashing attack towards his stomach. Daimaru defends and kicks the side of Naruto's abdomen. Which wouldn't be a problem, but he used much greater force than a training kick, causing Naruto to grit his teeth and stagger a few steps to the side. "What? That didn't hurt, right?" Daimaru asked, clearly provocative. Naruto didn't answer, but instead attacked him. He attempted a vertical blow, but Daimaru dodged and countered with a horizontal slash. However, Naruto ducked, supported his body with both hands, and kicked the man in the stomach, causing him to groan slightly and stagger back a few steps. Daimaru stared at Naruto with a very unfriendly expression, while the boy just stood in fighting stance again. "Haha, come on, Daimaru, you're getting rusty." One of the mercenaries sneered. "Get him, kid. Try not to kill him, Daimaru. I'm betting on the boy." Daimaru ignored the comments of others and advanced again, attempting a cutting attack from top to bottom. However, Naruto defended with his sword and kicked the side of Daimaru's leg, followed by a punch to the face. The man groaned in pain, but recovered quickly, trying to attack Naruto, who jumped back. Daimaru began to attack Naruto viciously, quick, precise movements. The boy was trying to defend himself as best he could, and even though he was very strong, Daimaru was a grown man, his strength was superior. At one point, Daimaru purposely attacked Naruto's sword, causing the boy to stand with his guard open. In one swift movement, he attempted a cutting blow from below. Blood gushed from the new wound on Naruto's body, who threw his body backwards at the sign of the attack, but was not fast enough to avoid full damage. His hand was immediately in his eye, and a groan, similar to a growl, escaped his throat. "Hey, goddammit Daimaru. What's your problem, man? This is training, you fucking asshole." Some men protested in anger at the sight of blood dripping through Naruto's fingers. Daimaru made a silly expression and scratched the back of his neck, as if he regretted it, although deep down he was pleased. However, there was no way he could not be surprised to see Naruto stand up, remove his hand from his eye and point his sword in his direction. A vertical cut from his cheek to above his eyebrow, but that didn't damage his right eye. "You see? The boy is fine. This is sword training, these things happen. He couldn't be considered a mercenary if he wasn't prepared," Daimaru said, getting into attack position again. "I hope I didn't take it too hard, kid. I can go lighter if you like. Shut up, and come at me." Naruto's cold voice made him smile, and do just that. Daimaru was amused by this image, Naruto's blood streaming down his face, which made him unaware of the flames present in the boy's blue eyes. Daimaru attempted a horizontal cut with his sword, however, Naruto slams his own blade against the man's, a much greater force than he had used so far. Daimaru took a few steps backwards due to the boy's strength, and he didn't even have time to recover. Naruto began to attack him viciously, movements just as fast and strong as before, giving Daimaru no time to do anything but defend himself as he moved away. At one point, Naruto cuts his forearm, causing Daimaru to stun himself, for only a few moments, from the sudden pain. Then, the boy cuts his thigh, followed by a kick to the stomach, causing Daimaru to drop to his knees. Naruto then strikes the man with the hilt of his sword, causing him to fall to the ground. To finish, the boy steps on his chest and puts his sword into Daimaru's neck, who stares at him with wide eyes. The surrounding mercenaries were silent, surprised to see Daimaru on the ground. "Hey, I think that's enough for a morning training session, don't you think?" Mifune's voice made itself present, and they looked at the man approaching calmly. Mifune stared at Naruto for a few moments, focusing his gaze on the wound on his face. Then he faced Daimaru on the ground. "You were stupid, Daimaru. Your childish actions have brought you to this end," he said in a cold voice, causing the man to click his tongue and mutter softly. "You can get off him now, Naruto. That wound needs a look," Mifune said, yawning soon after as he walked away. "That was a good fight," he said as he passed Naruto, who just followed him with his eyes, before looking again at Daimaru. A dark look, as if daring the man to try to do something against him again. With his typical neutral expression, Naruto stared at his reflection in the glass at the front of the store he had just left. More specifically, he stared at his hair, now shorter. It hadn't necessarily looked bad, he just wasn't used to having to do similar things. He didn't care much for his appearance either, but apparently even mercenaries should look decent when hired by an important figure like one of the generals of the army of the Fire Country Kingdom. And he had been procrastinating about this for some time. He should have had a haircut weeks ago, ever since they arrived in that city. Sighing, he turns and walks towards the place where he and his group of mercenaries were. Not before looking for a few moments at the scar in his eye. Damn you, Daimaru. In the end, he opted to stay with them. He had nowhere else to go anyway. On the way, he tried to ignore the glances cast in his direction, as well as the murmurs that began soon after he passed. People surprised to see such a young warrior, and/or frightened by the size of his sword compared to his body. No matter which city he went to, it was always the same. After a while of walking, he arrives at the camp where he was, together with the members of the royal army. With lazy steps, he approaches Mifune and throws some of his rings in his direction, who just arched an eyebrow and smiled in his way. "I didn't even say what I wanted." Naruto shook his head slightly. "You didn't have to. It was written all over your face." It took a few days for them to get to that town, and it had been a few weeks since then. And in the meantime, he had to admit that his relationship with some people was rather friendly. Mifune was smart and wise. Knowing him and recognizing his moments alone, he always seemed to know what he needed at a certain moment, with the excuse that he himself had once been in a similar situation. Mifune didn't explain in detail, and Naruto didn't care enough to ask. Ryuzetsu and Temari were nice, strong women, so in a way, he became close to them. Well, closer than with the rest of the group. As he walked, his eyes focused on the few rings on his fingers. Although he had given some of his jewelry to Mifune after deciding to stay, he still kept a few items with him, just in case. He agreed to be part of the group of mercenaries, but if a situation arises in which he must leave, he will not hesitate, and he must be prepared in case that happens. Taking his sword from its sheath, Naruto sits down in a wooden chair and begins to polish his blade just in front of his temporary tent. Occasionally he would look for something to occupy his mind. He was not a people person, not after so many past occurrences. Although he found that brief moment with his group nice and comforting, he preferred to be alone, or at least a little more isolated. They were still waiting for orders from the commanders, which they didn't even know when they would arrive. They could be in that place for days, or even months, before they received their orders. Nobody there drew his attention, and he tried to hide his blonde hair so as not to draw attention to himself. He trained with his sword in the morning, followed by physical training, and practically had the whole afternoon free. In short, it was pretty boring there. "Oh, idiot, come on, I want to train." A sigh escaped his lips. Of course, he had Temari to take him out of his boredom, which at the moment he was grateful for. After that night when they spent hours training, the girl had been asking him for training whenever she had the chance, especially after seeing him defeat Daimaru. According to her, she wanted to evolve fast enough to have the possibility of participating in the next battle. Something Naruto doubted, but remained quiet. Turning to the girl, he grabs, still in the air, a short sword that she threw in his direction. A sword she stole. Borrowed from some army soldier the moment they arrived there. "Have you done your physical training today?" he asked, putting his sword back in its sheath and walking beside the girl, a few steps away. "Yes. Not much though, all that woman's work and shit," she said with a scowl and her voice slightly bitter, something Naruto was used to by that point. Although Temari still had flaws, her progress was obvious. Her body was more shapely, with muscles more apparent though not by much. Her strength had increased, as had her speed and agility. She was staying calmer though, as the physical training took away most of her stress. Not to mention that she now walked with her head held high among all those men, with no fear, trepidation or hesitation in her eyes. Which made Naruto feel a pang of pride in his chest, like a master watching his student progress. And he wouldn't admit it, but the girl's speed helped him train his own, both his body speed and his sword swing. After walking for some time, they arrived in a more secluded part. Most of the men decided to train near the tents, while both of them preferred a farther and less noisy place. Naruto snapped the bones in his neck as he prepared for training. Temari, in front of him, stared at him with a strange gleam in her greenish eyes. Naruto, you know, I think it's about time you used your sword against me." He arched an eyebrow. "You said yourself that I need to train for all different kinds of opponents, short, tall, thin, big. You're just a kid, but you're extremely strong, much as I hate to admit it." He smiles slightly, laughing softly when the girl points her middle finger at him. "Anyway, I need experience in dealing with opponents who are heavier and stronger than me. And I know you control your speed with this short sword." She had a point. Her father's sword was heavier than a normal sword, and the short sword Tamari used was lighter than a normal sword. His movements, even if unconsciously, were much faster. Naruto put the short sword back in its sheath and crossed his arms. "Are you sure?" She smiled defiantly. "What is it? Afraid? Or do you think I can't do it?" "Neither. I know you can do it. But one slip, and I can break your sword." She shrugged. "Good thing I have two then. And it's training, so I'll practice to avoid that in a real fight." He stared at her for a while longer, then sighed again. Turning his neck, he throws his short sword to the side and picks up his sword from his back, getting into attack position soon after. Tamari smiled for a few moments, but soon, she too got into attack position. Her eyes seemed to glow as she stared at Naruto, like a predator staring at its prey. Quickly, she moves towards him, trying to slash him in the chest. However, Naruto blocks with his sword. Tamari moves nimbly, taking a step to the side and trying to attack the boy again. Naruto dodges and counters with an elbow to the girl's arm, followed by an attack with his sword. Tamari slightly widened her eyes and dodged. It was a fast attack, faster than she had expected, and she could see some strands of her hair being cut by the movement of the huge blade. If she tried to defend herself, it would be as Naruto had said, her sword would break. "You started well. On opponents like this, don't let him use his sword, hammer, axe or whatever. In an open space like this, however, if you walk away, you're finished." He finished saying this and advanced towards the girl, who again slightly widened her eyes. Naruto was fast as he was using the short sword. He tries a vertical cut, but the girl deflects and counters, trying to punch him in the stomach. However, Naruto takes a step to the side and tries to counterattack. Tamari is faster and punches him in the side of the abdomen, spinning her body around and again trying to cut the blonde. Naruto ducks and hits her with a kick to the stomach, getting up and trying a vertical cut from top to bottom on the girl, who despite the pain, recovers and moves away, dodging the blow that made the blade sink slightly into the ground. Tamari advances again, this time getting even closer than before. She tries to pierce Naruto's chest, but he deflects by leaning his body to the side. Before he could act, however, she punches him in the face, followed by a knee to the stomach, and finally, she tries to stick her sword in his neck. However, Naruto quickly recovers and deflects, landing a punch to the side of the girl's abdomen. Tamari groans slightly in pain, but quickly reacts by headbutting Naruto in the nose and kicking him forward, trying again to cut him with her sword. Naruto steps back and deflects Tamari's attack, turning his body and slashing at the girl, knocking her to the ground. He quickly gets on top of her and puts his sword to her neck. The girl stares at him for a while, until her typical annoyed expression spreads across her face, and she turns her head and grumbles lowly after letting go of her sword. Naruto smiled slightly and stepped back, watching her stand up as he put his sword back into its sheath. "You're faster, your reflexes are better. Your strength has also increased, although your punches are still too weak. But overall, you are progressing very well," he said, wiping the trickle of blood that dripped from his nose from the headbutt. Tamari, despite her anger at having lost, looks at him incredulously. "Who the fuck are you?" Naruto arches an eyebrow in confusion. Naruto has not complimented me once in these weeks of training. He smiled. Well, now I have. Keep it up and maybe you'll have a chance to go to the battlefield. He crossed his arms, staring at her calmly. HMPF, if that commander has the balls to let a woman go to the battlefield. Son of a bitch seemed about to throw up when Mifune mentioned it. She grumbled, putting her sword back into its sheath and then walking over to get the other one. Relax, I think I can convince him. She arched an eyebrow. You? Convince the commander of one of the troops of the fucking royal army? Disbelief was evident in her voice, and Naruto just snorted. If not me, Mifune. But that's only if we stay here for a few more years. You've improved, but you're not ready for a real battle yet. He said, looking up at the sky for a few moments. Arg. I've lost count of how many times you've said that. It's fucking annoying. She grumbled. Because it's true. I see your potential, Tamari, but battle is totally different. Some men may be good at training, but they die as soon as the battle begins. There, taking advantage of the terrain is also important. That is something that is used by both sides. She sighed. He rarely spoke with that kind of seriousness in his voice. She just waved her hand and scratched the back of her neck with the other. I know. Anyway, I'll bet you 10 bronze coins that I beat you in the race from here to downtown. He arched an eyebrow. 10 bronze coins, that would be 1 silver coin. Why so much money? Feeling generous today? Confident in my ability now that you complimented me. She smiled. Now, don't get so cocky. You're not. Off we go. She interrupted him with a little start yell, and started running soon after. Naruto blinked a few times and then sighed, shaking his head slightly just before running after her. After 2 months the orders finally arrived. The mercenaries, together with the royal army, were preparing to capture one of the forts taken by the enemy. They were some kilometers away from the city, and the commander had just given them his takti. The enemy was already waiting for them, but they had to take the place at all costs. According to him, with the loss of the fort, they lost resources and currency, as well as having their kingdom drastically weakened. Or something like that. Naruto was a mercenary, not a fucking soldier. He didn't give a fuck. The battle began and he grumbled as he saw a shower of arrows fall towards the group of soldiers. Ducking down, he leapt forward, standing just behind a huge man with a shield. He could hear some groans and screams as the rain of arrows fell. Some men hit. Most were in full armor, so this was not really a problem. Coming out from behind the man, Naruto moved quickly along the front line, going with everything he had towards the enemy's first line of defense. Further ahead, one of the men in his group fell to his knees after being hit. The boy's blue eyes were wide open, and he used the man's back as a stepping stone to jump over him and land a horizontal attack on his enemy, strong enough to ignore the small part of the enemy helmet that protected his head and cut his opponent's head in half. His front line advanced, defeating and knocking off the bridge every man in the first line of enemy defense. Naruto advanced as well. A few steps later, he widened his eyes when he saw an archer shoot an arrow in his direction, but he didn't have to worry too much. Despite the strong impact on his chest, the arrow did not penetrate his armor, and he just continued his way across the bridge. However, he suddenly stopped. The enemy stopped shooting arrows and he heard a commotion over the walls. His eyes again widened as he saw cauldrons of boiling water being poured on the soldiers in front of the gates. He walked away as fast as he could, hearing the screams of pain from the soldiers ahead. Arg! What the hell? He grumbled loudly as he saw the cauldrons being replaced by cannons, and without thinking, he jumped off the bridge and fell into the river that flowed just below, hearing, even if muffled, the sound of the explosions happening above him and the noise of the bridge being destroyed. Naruto swam as fast as he could towards the shore outside the walls of the enemy base, having some difficulty doing so with so many rocks in his way and the weight of both his sword and his armor. But he did not do all that physical training for nothing. When he reaches the shore, he opens the front of his helmet and coughs a few times. After recovering, he looks for a moment at the state of the almost completely destroyed bridge. The soldiers on the other side of the shore were being bombarded by cannons, but a new wave of soldiers was approaching not far behind. A decent number of men had managed to jump into the river before the explosions and were approaching the shore. But along the wreckage, there were motionless, bloodied bodies all around being swept away by the current of the river. Naruto was brought out of his thoughts when he heard a scream coming from in front of him. The enemy had come down some stairs and made sure that there were no survivors, which made the boy roll his eyes. Quickly analyzing his opponent, he dodges a cutting attack with a sword and pierces the side of the leg of the man in dark armor with a purple snake crest. Another man appears behind the first, attacking Naruto, who dodges, withdraws his sword from the leg of the first opponent, and stabs it into the neck of the second. In one swift motion, Naruto kicks the man's shielded chest and pushes him to the ground, standing on top of his opponent's body. Withdrawing his sword from the neck of the man he had just killed, Naruto drives his blade into the throat of the man below his feet. His enemies had armor that covered a good part of their bodies, but there were exposed parts that could be exploited. The men coming to the shore were already preparing to fight, the larger ones taking the lead and using their brute strength and sturdy bodies to serve as defense and offense. Naruto was about to join them, but a familiar scene caught his eye. To the left, along the small bank, a small figure in incomplete armor was fighting a man almost twice his size. Which would not be so unusual to see, since Naruto did this in his daily life. However, the movements, the short sword, and even the groans of exertion said well who was that person. Naruto gritted his teeth as he saw another man approaching. Squeezing the hilt of his sword, he rushes towards his enemy and leaps, turning his body horizontally while still in the air and decapitating his enemy in a single motion. Looking at his companion, he stared with cold eyes at the small person who thrust his sword into the man's waist, but then was knocked down by the man. The boy shakes his head and quickly pierces the back of the man's head with his sword, pushing his dead body aside soon after. For a few moments, he looks back, before he sticks his sword in the ground and walks over to Temari. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked coldly and in a low voice, but anger eminent in his words and in his eyes. Naruto grabbed Temari by the wrist and forced her to stand. "Do you think this is a joke?" Before she could answer, he pulled her back and forced her to stare at the severed head of the man he had killed. "Does this look like a joke to you? Why aren't you in the camp?" he grunted, still in a dangerously low voice, and despite his unchanged expression, his eyes burned with a blazing blue fire. Worried for her, in that time he had learned to see her as more than just a girl he met in a group of mercenaries. Also, concerned for Ryuzetsu, he knew the attachment the woman had for the girl. Temari just pulled her arm tight and picked up her sword again. "I wouldn't be left out. There's no way I'd be doing laundry and cooking when you're here." "I can do it," she said, ignoring the flames in Naruto's eyes. He took a few deep breaths, putting one hand on his waist and the other on his forehead, closing his eyes for just a few moments. Well, too late to send her back. And knowing the girl, he doubted that she would really go back. "You will stay close to me, understand? You're not leaving my side." She grimaced. "No, shut up and listen to me." He interrupted her when he saw that she was about to complain. "I've always told you that the battlefield is different from the training camp, and if you want to stay here, you're going to have to do exactly as I say, is that clear?" She shook her head and sighed in irritation, but in the end nodded in confirmation. So stubborn. Naruto picked up his sword again and ran alongside the other men, with Temari right behind him. Despite the number, it was obvious that the soldiers from the Fire Country Kingdom were more skilled. They climbed the stairs blocked by the bodies of fallen warriors, and soon, Naruto's eyes widened when a tall, burly man with a huge axe tried to attack him. The boy dodged, throwing his torso back and counterattacking with a sharp blow to the man's shoulder. However, the man blocked with the handle of his axe and attacked again. Naruto grabbed Temari by the shoulder and ducked, taking a deep breath in surprise as he saw the axe break two men in half with ease. Gritting his teeth, Naruto pulls Temari back and steps back, dodging the man's constant attacks. Other soldiers from his group tried to attack him, but were stopped by enemy soldiers, who were many by the way, since they were inside the enemy fortress. Seeing that they were approaching the wall, Naruto pushed Temari aside, throwing his body to the opposite side soon after, and closing one of his eyes as the man's axe crashed into the ground and raised a small cloud of dust on impact. The boy's blue eyes went wide open, muscles all over his body contracted, his veins bulged, and his heart beat faster. Leaning his body to the side, Naruto dodged a side attack from the man while striking him with his sword. The long blade hit the man's armor, but the force behind his movement was enough to bypass the metal and penetrate the flesh between the man's shoulder and upper chest. A muffled cry of pain could be heard from beneath the enemy's helmet, which bought Naruto a small window of time to act. The boy drew his sword, lowered his body slightly as he spun around and drove his sword sideways into the side of his enemy's abdomen, again, ignoring his armor. Naruto gritted his teeth as he felt his muscles burn from the incredible force he was making. It was not easy to pierce armor, even chain mail armor was enough to stop sword strikes. The man cried out in pain, but recovered quickly and tried to punch Naruto. However, the boy dodged it by throwing his body to the side, grabbed one of his knives from his waist and stabbed it into the lower forearm of his opponent. The man again screamed, and with the back of his forearm, slammed against Naruto's helmet, inflicting no damage, but being enough to push him backwards. The man attacked Naruto with a sharp blow with his axe, however, the boy dodged and with one swift movement delivered a sharp blow to both legs of the man, who fell to his knees. Raising his body, Naruto delivers a strong vertical blow from the bottom up, cutting part of the man's chin and removing his helmet. The man had short hair, hard expressions with some lines, a scar on his temple. He tried to move, but Naruto hit him in the face with the handle of his sword, followed by a kick to his neck and finally a blow with his blade to both of the man's arms, making him drop his axe. Running to the side, Naruto uses the wall as momentum to jump as high as his enemy's own height, and with one swift and precise movement, he splits the man's head in half. All around, the sound of swords clashing against swords and shields ceased, and the enemy's eyes focused on the body of the fallen man at Naruto's feet, who was simply wiping away the blood that splattered on his armor. The front gates of the fort were abruptly opened, and the soldiers from the Country of Fire stormed the fort. The enemies that were not killed immediately after the soldiers entered, surrendered after seeing that the forces of the Fire Country were larger. Some soldiers praised Naruto as they passed him, but the boy only focused his eyes on Temari, who was looking at him wide-eyed. Hours passed. After the mission ended successfully, a large number of the soldiers, mostly the mercenaries hired by the king, were sent back to camp. News went fast, and it didn't take long before the rumors of Naruto defeating the enemy general ran throughout the camp, and even by the soldiers in the city. The boy hadn't felt so uncomfortable like that in a long time. He didn't need all that. The enemy general wasn't a god. just a man who happened to die by his hand. Although the most annoying thing, for him, was dodging the touch of soldiers who didn't live with him long enough to know that he hated being touched. Though his group of mercenaries, though they also congratulated him and were incredulous at his accomplishment, respected his space and were much easier to talk to than a bunch of unknown soldiers. At the moment, Naruto was letting out a breath he didn't even know he was holding as he sat on the ground atop a small hill near the camp at the edge of town. He, as always, was hugging his sword fresh from the blacksmith and staring at the moon hidden by some clouds. He needed some air. He didn't know if he could take another second of the commander trying to recruit him to work with the army. His mind wandered back to the battle, more precisely, to the moments before the bridge was destroyed. As far as he knew, many soldiers died. Some mercenaries too. He didn't know quite what to feel, since, although they were part of the same group, he wasn't close enough to most of them to care, at least a little, about them. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching from his side. From the sound and pattern of the footsteps, he didn't have to turn his head to know who it was. "You can't take Ryuzetsu's yelling?" he asked as Tamari sat down beside him, and she answered him with a sigh. "To tell you the truth, she didn't cuss me that much. She cried a lot though." He snorted. "Of course." They were silent for a while, both of them feeling the light cold breeze against their faces and the swaying of their hair. Despite the silence and stillness, Naruto knew that Tamari was restless, nervous. "Do you have something to say?" She stared at him for a while. I'm sorry." He arched an eyebrow and looked at her. "I realized, when Ryuzetsu was crying, how stupid it was to do that." She rested her arms on her knees. "I mean, damn, I was scared. When that guy attacked me, on the shore, just before you came along, I thought it would be just like training, that despite his size, all I had to do was imagine you in his place." She laughed humorlessly. "How wrong I was. Like you said, it's different on the battlefield." She turned back to staring at the moon. "No need to apologize, it doesn't matter anymore. And well, I guess you could say that it was experience for you. You learned something valuable. Cheer up, not everyone comes back from the battlefield." She smiled, but soon the smile died. Surprising that a child can do that all the time. Naruto snorted, a nasal laugh. "To tell you the truth, this was my first battle as a mercenary." "No fucking way." She blinked in disbelief. "Seriously, at least one battle as a soldier." "I've been fighting alone ever since." "Well, ever since I was forced to fight alone. Bandits, soldiers, nobles. I must say that you didn't look like it, you moved as if you were used to it." "Well, maybe it's because I'm used to killing, in a way, I've always walked around a battlefield. Or because my father was a mercenary, and he trained me for a long time. Sword, bow and arrow, throwing knives." She arched an eyebrow. "You know how to throw knives? Why didn't you teach me?" He blinked. "You never asked." You're kidding, aren't you? Fucking hell, knife throwing is what I'm all about." He scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, well, maybe I can teach you later." "You'd better." He rolled his eyes and she shook her head. "Now I know that you take it easy on me in training." "Well, it's training. The goal is to teach you, not to hurt you." "Well, not always, of course. I mean, I always knew, but after today, I feel like a fool for thinking that I could defeat you." "Hey, of course you can. In combat, strength and skill are of utmost importance, of course, but not always the strongest wins. There are other factors that contribute to a victory. The environment around you, weapons, such as the boiling water the enemy used today, number of people. A mercenary will not fight alone, at least not most of the time. He cracked the bones in his neck. Yes, I know, it's just that. After all these months of training, I thought that, I don't know, I had gotten stronger. And you did. You're just not ready for the battlefield yet. Man or woman, it doesn't matter, they need to go through constant training, and it's not something that just lasts a few months. Only after a few years do you become skilled enough to participate in a battle like the one today. The training lasts as long as you are in the business, or for your whole life. She sighed. Look, I understand that you're eager to prove that you're not just a woman, that your gender doesn't make you less than a man, I really do, but these things require patience. Like I said, it's something that takes years, not months. Be patient and you will get there. But for now, practice. She stared at him, her greenish eyes locked in the boy's blue ones, which seemed to glow in the darkness of the night. A deep blue like the ocean. Even after so long, being the closest person to him even among her own group, she still could not figure him out. While it was surprising that a boy had so much battle knowledge, it was also kind of sad. Not that she could tell anything, most of the people there had a sad past. She sighed and looked away. Hugging her legs, she rested her chin on her knees and closed her eyes for a few moments. Naruto. I think I need a bigger sword. Running his hand through his wet hair, Naruto sighs as he feels the cold water run down his back. With strides, he walks to a deeper part of the lake and sinks into the water, swimming for a few moments before returning to the surface. Naruto shakes his head a few times, feeling the wet strands sticking to his forehead. Swimming calmly closer to the shore, he stares at his reflection in the water. There were very few times he could take a bath in these last few years. After that battle with the Royal Army, they were required for several other missions. The mercenary group even became somewhat famous for a while, this before their catastrophic loss in the attempt to protect a mining company in the kingdom. Many died that day. Sighing, he ran his eyes over his body. The scars on his chest and back increased in number, although not by that much. The claw marks still on his cheek matched his appearance even more as he grew older. 17 years old, many mistook him for a full-grown adult. Large muscles that, along with his great height, contributed to his beautiful and even terrifying appearance. Beauty and danger ran together in his eyes and face to the point that he even earned a nickname among the mercenaries. Yellow Flash. A respect that his speed and strength won in his favor. Naruto closed his eyes before leaving the lake, feeling the water still on his waist and holding back a small smile. A few feet away, someone was watching him with slightly panting breaths. Although, his stalker didn't have much time to admire him, since a loud noise still in the forest alerted whoever that person was, and the person ran off in fear of being discovered. TSC, your fans are getting braver and braver. Or stupid. Tamari walked calmly towards him with an expression in a mixture of tiredness and irritation. In those years she had grown a lot, being considered tall for a woman. Her muscles were outlined by the clothes she wore, although she didn't have as much mass as Naruto, or some other man, but it was enough. The girl sat on her legs right next to Naruto's clothes and sword that were near the shore of the lake. It's not something that bothers me, he replied, walking away from the lake, not bothering to show his body. In fact, he was already used to being naked around other people, a consequence of all those years traveling with a group of mercenaries. Aren't you ashamed? You're in front of a lady. She scolded, although she didn't make the slightest effort to look away. PFF, you've seen it all anyway, what difference does it make? Besides, you're not like the other ladies. She arched an eyebrow. What do you mean? A dangerous tone in her voice. I mean that you're not delicate, much less dull like a lady, so I don't need to worry about words or actions around you. She snorted. Well, I'm sure if your stalker were here she'd be having a wonderful time. He arched an eyebrow. Someone's in a bad mood. She sighed, running her hand through her hair as she watched him put on his clothes. It's Mifune. He wants me to stay here during the next battle, but we're short of people since that attack years ago. We need everyone we have. She said, and Naruto sighed lightly, scratching the back of his head. Well, I guess I understand your anger. But since you didn't attack me the moment I got out of the water, that means you managed to convince him otherwise. He sat down beside her, leaning his sword on his shoulder and hugging it gently as he always did. Yes, but it was a very stressful process, especially since Ryuzetsu doesn't want me to go. He smiled. She has to get used to this, you are a mercenary. I know, I wish she could see that. It would be easier for both of us. Naruto leaned back against a tree and they sat in silence, watching the lake water reflecting the morning sun. That was normal between the two of them, just being silent before or after a day of training, enjoying their presence. Naruto, as much as he would not admit it, liked Temari. She was nice, although he had lost the knowledge of the definition of that word long ago. She was different, perhaps the closest thing he could call a friend. He didn't know exactly, he had never had a friend, outside of course of Gamakichi and his brother. Temari, on the other hand, felt comfortable around him. Not just a feeling of gratitude that he had taught her how to use a sword and had opened so many doors for her, but something more. Despite his typically neutral expression, she had spent enough time with him to know his body language. In a way, she knew sides of the boy that the others didn't, and that made her happy. He wasn't just a boy who lived to fight like most of his companions thought, although even after so much time, she still had trouble deciphering him completely. But moments like this were moments when she let herself relax. She didn't have to worry, not with Naruto by her side. Although, at that very moment, it was a little difficult to relax with him still bare-chested. Really, you could at least pretend to be embarrassed. He arched an eyebrow. Why? Does it bother you? No, she answered too quickly. I mean, yes. Arg. You're so fucking annoying. He grimaced in confusion. What did I do? Nothing, you. She sighed in defeat. Christ, I can't stand you. He grimaced even worse than before, but quickly shrugged when he saw that she wouldn't say anything more. But, Naruto knew Temari well enough to know when she was restless, or maybe he just had good eyes for that sort of thing. He rested his arm on his knee and sighed. What? You're nervous. She glanced over at him, looking a little afraid. I turned 21 a few months ago. He winked. As a present you gave me this sword. She placed her hand gently on the handle of the huge sword on her back, custom made by Naruto who paid with one of his remaining rings. In all this time I have never given you anything, on any of your birthdays. He arched an eyebrow. Is that what's bothering you? Well, you don't have to, I've never celebrated my birthday. It's not that important. What do you mean it's not? I don't know, it just isn't. I think that after the things I did and went through at a young age, the rest just lost its meaning. Birthday is not something that concerns me. She stared at him, shortly after looking around, making sure that no one was around. How long until you turn 18? Oh, I don't know, about 6 months. She moved, placing a hand gently on Naruto's shoulder. The boy stared at her hand for a few moments, a calloused hand, but small and with small details that made a female hand evident. Soon, he looked away and back into her eyes. He had gotten used to her touching him, he was not repulsed, not like he was with others. After Daimaru died, as well as some of our women in the attack, I did a lot of thinking. The life of a mercenary is cruel, and there is no guarantee that we will return from the battlefield. There never was. He nodded. Yes, and what does that have to do with my birthday? I never repay you, you know, for everything you've done. And I don't want to die without at least doing something, giving you something to remember me by. He smiled, though a little awkwardly at the soft tone she rarely used. The scars you left on my body are enough, I can't forget them. She laughed. Well, there's that, and that's when I realized. You're not interested in jewelry, or accessories, blades and other weapons you already have. But what I can give you are memories. Memories? Yes, good memories, happy even. Pleasant ones. He stared at her. What's the matter with you? You're strangely calm today, much calmer than I've seen you in years. Even sweet, and that scares me. She smiled. Scares you? Yes, this isn't how you normally are. He shrugged. I'm always like this with Ryuzetsu. But you love her. She was silent, as was Naruto, who blinked a few times before digesting what he himself had said, and looking at Temari with eyes gleaming in surprise and confusion. Wait, you don't. No, I don't love you. She cut him off, arching an eyebrow as she saw a hint of relief and hidden disappointment. Well, I think I don't love you. She removed the sword from her back, as well as the knives hidden in her clothes, and turned to Naruto. As I said, after we suffered that great loss, I gave it a lot of thought. I want to make sure that I am marked in your mind. A happy memory. She touched his shoulder again, this time a little harder. Positioning herself beside him, she slipped her leg over Naruto's waist and sat on his lap, both hands on his shoulders, both legs on either side of his broad body, and her eyes staring straight into Naruto's blue ones. The boy stared at her, the ocean blue being more visible and intense because his eyes were wide open. Surprise, confusion, fear, all running through his gaze. You. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out of his mouth. Temari smiled, and gently placed her hand on his chin. Without averting her eyes, the girl began to approach Naruto slowly, as if afraid of scaring him, until their lips touched. A simple kiss, shy at first, getting a little deeper as the girl hugged Naruto's neck. They separated a few moments later, both staring intensely at each other. Naruto felt strong, unfamiliar sensations run through his entire body, concentrating mostly between his legs. The feel of Temari's body against his, so different. The feeling of her arms embracing him so lovingly, so unique, with such a contrast from the punches, squeezes and blows that had already hit his skin. The feel of his lips touching hers. Soft, warm lips, the smell of the woman on his lap invading his nose and inhibiting his senses. He never thought he could feel such a good sensation coming from someone else's lips, not after that nobleman. You. Are you sure? You said. You said you didn't love me. And what does that have to do with anything? I mean, isn't that something that, I don't know, you do with someone you love? She blinked a few times, until she started to laugh lightly, bouncing softly on Naruto's lap with every instant she laughed. No. I mean, technically, yes. It's just pleasure, just fun. If both parties are interested and agree to it, I don't see why not do it. I mean, I never. I know. He blinked. She rolled her eyes, and moving closer to him again, she sealed his lips with her own, running her hand gently along the golden strands and allowing herself to be consumed by the unconscious ferocity of Naruto's soft lips. Naruto, for his part, though slowly letting himself go, was wary of touching her. Images of the past returned in his mind, and although he was not afraid of Temari's touch, he was afraid that his touch would hurt her. Not as training, not that kind of physical hurt, but something he almost suffered. That fear of his was soon cast aside when Temari gently grabbed one of his arms and put it around her waist, which allowed him to use the other to touch her freely. And you all know what's going to happen now, and if you want YouTube don't get mad at me, please refer to chapter 8 of the story.
This was it for today. To watch next part, subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notifications so you never miss an upload. Till then, see you next time.